Daily Wheeling Gazette, October 22nd, 1849. First crossing of the suspension bridge. The last timber was then swung and covered with planks, and the carriage proceeded onward amid the breathless anxiety of the assembled multitude, who watched it rolling like a triumphal chariot at its dizzy height through the air.
The roar of a cannon greeted the first crossing of the Wheeling Suspension Bridge. It was a work of wonder, and in it, the citizens of Wheeling saw their future and the future of a nation. 150 years later, the echoes of a cannon mark a new milestone in the bridge's history at a riverside park in Wheeling, West Virginia. The excitement of crossing a bridge for the first time is alive today in spirit and in celebration. It's the story of a bridge, but it's also the story of a city, of a nation, and of invention. The first bridge to cross the mighty Ohio River, the longest bridge in the world when it was completed. Using cutting-edge technology, it embodied America's need to move forward.
It led to the American ascendancy in suspension bridge design until well after the Second World War.
It has carried pioneer families heading west, slaves escaping to the free state of Ohio, Civil War soldiers, and World War II convoys. It stood firm while floodwaters raged beneath, holding witness as a schoolhouse was being swept 100 miles downriver. It has even carried circus cars, camels, and elephants.
I can remember that as a child, just the elephants was crossing the bridge. It swayed. Pretty good.
I think most people just enjoy walking. To walk that bridge and stand in the middle and watch the river and look at the way the bridge is built is a real treat.
This one sets the pattern for the Golden Gate Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, and for all those other wonderful suspension bridges that we've found all around the world.
When you looked at that particular time, people traveling over 200 miles just to come to Wheeling to cross that bridge, because certain times of the year, that river was almost impossible to cross.
I like that bridge. It's beautiful. There's no other way to say it. It's just a beautiful bridge.
It was a time of great and monumental improvements for America. The National Road, America's first federal highway, was winding its way from Baltimore across the Appalachian and would reach its end point at the Ohio River in Wheeling in 1818, bringing with it trade, travelers, and mail. By 1822, 5,000 wagons arrived annually at Wheeling. The city was now a center of shops, hotels, and factories. One local entrepreneur sought to provide a cheap cigar for the multitude of Conestoga drivers passing through town, and so the stogie was born. The trade didn't arrive just by road. In 1836, there were over 1,600 steamboat arrivals and departures. By the middle of the century, millions of passengers would travel the nearly 1,000-mile-long Ohio River each year. For Wheeling to grow as a trade center and become a gateway to the West, there was only one missing link: a bridge spanning the Ohio River.
It really symbolizes the movement of people across the country. When this was a frontier area, and of course the importance of building that bridge, it was all a big part of moving people from the east to the west. I see it as that gateway.
The Wheeling and Belmont Bridge Company had been chartered by the Virginia legislature to link Wheeling to the untapped resources of the West by building a bridge across the Ohio River.
The people of Wheeling recognized that one of the things that was going to be important was to find a way of taking goods and people across the river in the quickest way and the least expensive way. So you have some people in Wheeling who were pretty advanced in terms of their thinking and understanding of how important transportation is to development and economics.
Many of the nearly 13,000 residents of Wheeling would put their faith in the future of the city by purchasing stock in this new venture at $25 per share.
This is what, folks can do 150 years ago and do it on their own. They raised the money, they hired the workers, they took all the materials locally, and they built a monument to their entrepreneurial spirit that's been around for 150 years. That's an accomplishment.
The design of the bridge was born in the mind of a young engineer from the outskirts of Philadelphia. From the age of 17, Charles Ellet Jr. had worked on the C&O Canal, but it was the technologically advanced bridges of Europe that captivated him.
Ellet was a pretty amazing guy when you think about what he did. He was raised on a farm. He taught himself an awful lot of his knowledge by reading books in the fields, which made his father very angry. His father wanted him to become a farmer. And finally, he gained his mother's support and just simply went off and became a surveyor. And then realizing that the state of the art in many of the technologies that he was interested in were further developed in Europe than they were in the United States, he literally taught himself French and then wrote letters to the French embassy and to General Lafayette and a number of other people, and succeeded in talking his way into the ENPC, which was the MIT of the era. Top engineering school in the world, and here's a guy without even a grade school education, and he's admitted as a student and attends the lectures. He went to 2 semesters worth of lectures there and then left the ENPC and just simply walked around Europe on foot, went to every engineering project he could think of. But when he came back, he was filled with more of the latest advanced engineering ideas than anybody in the United States, all done entirely on his own.
Ellet established a reputation as a pioneering engineer when he designed America's first major wire suspension bridge over the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. Suspension bridge design was gaining advocates, made possible by new applications of iron wire technology.
To make wire was very easy, and it could be made here, and you could lay up these cables wire by wire till you got several thousand wires, and then you could span more than 1,000 feet. It was really a very exciting and leading edge technology, just like our space age, I guess.
John A. Roebling was the only other American engineer believed capable of building a suspension bridge from Wheeling across the Ohio. He and Charles Ellet Jr. were asked to submit plans. Ellet had to convince the bridge company that the new suspension technology would work. His design included a reference to the inspiration for suspension engineering, Peruvian rope bridges. Ellet's proposal for wheeling would exceed the world's record by 140 feet. In 1826, the British had built the 580-foot Menai suspension bridge, while in 1834, the French Fribourg Bridge was the world's longest at 870 feet. Ellet's plan called for a daring 1,010-foot span, at the time unheard of. Unlike Roebling, Ellet's design would keep the river channel unobstructed by piers. And it was less expensive. It was the plan of Charles Ellet Jr. that won.
When the bridge was completed, Wheeling knew that it made a statement as the mid-19th century gateway to the West. The West would, be Ohio. But the Wheeling people who funded and underwrote the cost of this bridge knew that they had an outstanding structure in the literature. The newspaper articles said that they had a major gala event.
After nearly a year and a half of construction, cannons roared and music played to celebrate the first bridge to cross the mighty Ohio River.
The daily Wheeling Gazette. Torrent may now roll, and the icebergs plunge upon the bosom of the swollen river. But above it, unharmed and fearless, will pass the traveler without delay or toil. The produce of the West and the commerce of the East will join hands in gratitude to the builders of this great public work.
At nightfall, more than 1,000 lamps provided a new and striking illumination of Ellet's grand new structure. In only its first 2 weeks, the bridge conveyed 2,336 travelers on foot, many of them pioneers heading west, 1,680 wagons, 387 travelers on horseback, and 766 animals in droves. A great link had been completed in the settlement of the continent. Tolls were established. For foot passengers, 5 cents for round trip. Man and horse, 10 cents. 6-horse wagon, 15 cents. Hogs and sheep, 2 cents per head.
Cornering the market on the Ohio River at Wheeling was a very clever idea. When you looked at that particular time and all the people who were moving west and colonizing this country, that was a major feat.
Wheeling was gaining fame as a transportation hub. The Baltimore and Ohio train line arrived in 1853, aided by the investment of the Wheeling and Belmont Bridge Company. With the growth of trade, a federal custom house was erected in 1859. Wheeling was growing as a transportation center, but there was a jealous rival to the north. Pittsburgh, with its 3 rivers, was vying for the title of Gateway to the West. Before construction of the bridge was even begun, the merchants of Pittsburgh began a campaign against it, claiming it obstructed the smokestacks of steamboats, barring their passage to and from the port of Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh Commercial Journal. Do the press or people of Wheeling suppose for a moment that our citizens are such egregious asses as to permit an obstruction of the navigation of the Ohio River, the freedom of which is vital to the prosperity of Pittsburgh.
In 1849, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, acting on behalf of Pittsburgh, brought suit against the Wheeling and Belmont Bridge Company in the U.S. Supreme Court. 3 years later, after 100 witnesses and 1,200 pages of testimony, the court pronounced its verdict. The bridge must either be raised 21 feet in elevation at tremendous cost or be torn down within 9 months. Gazing at the bridge, famed statesman and champion of American industry Henry Clay voiced the feelings of Wheeling's residents. Take that down? You might as well take down the rainbow. In 1852, after a few months of intensive lobbying, an act of Congress, later upheld by the Supreme Court, declared the bridge a lawful structure and a postal road. It also required all steamboat stacks to either fit or be collapsible. But 2 years later, a violent windstorm came up the river, and the forces of nature accomplished what the bridge's opponents could not.
The Wheeling Intelligencer, May 17, 1854. For a few moments, we watched it with breathless anxiety, lunging like a ship in the storm. At one time, it rose to nearly the height of the towers, then fell and twisted and writhed and was dashed almost bottom upward.
A century later, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington State met a similar demise in a windstorm, nearly matching the Wheeling newspaper report. Both bridges lacked design elements that would stiffen their structures and provide aerodynamic stability.
At last, there seemed to be a determined twist along the entire span, about one half the flooring being nearly reversed, and down went the immense structure from its dizzy height to the stream below with an appalling crash and roar. Nearly the entire structure struck the water at the same instant, dashing up an unbroken column of foam across the river to the height of at least 40 feet.
Accounts of the Wheeling suspension bridge collapse were wired around the world. The residents of Pittsburgh celebrated the news of the bridge's demise. One Pittsburgh steamboat mockingly lowered its smokestacks as it passed over the bridge wreckage. But when Ellet heard of the bridge collapse, he saw it as a new opportunity.
Many engineers would have wanted to leave the country or hide under a rock. Ellet, being what he was summoned to Wheeling and came here and said, "This is what you always wanted. You could put a railway on this and connect the Baltimore and Ohio with railways in Ohio, and we can redesign it." That didn't actually happen, but he was involved with a man called McComas in rebuilding the bridge.
Remarkably, the bridge would be rebuilt in 40 days. In 1860, Howe trusses were added, forming a railing on either side of the bridge and stiffening the structure. Ellet's 12 cables were gathered into 2 on each side and wrapped in wire. Guy piers above and below the bridge were added, and wind guys placed at points along the platform of the bridge. In 1872, Wilhelm Hildenbrand, an engineer with Roebling's company, reworked the deck structure and added diagonal stay wires between the towers and the deck to increase stiffness. Ironically, Roebling, the engineer of the Brooklyn Bridge, was mistakenly given credit for the design of the Wheeling Bridge. But in 1969, Charles Ellet Jr. finally received due credit for his innovative work. Ellet never built another bridge after Wheeling. He went on to become a consulting engineer for the Virginia Central Railroad and later designed plans for controlling the floodwaters of the Ohio. When the Civil War broke out, Wheeling sided with the North and became the capital of the new state of West Virginia. As Colonel of Engineers for the Union forces, Ellet designed rams for ships that played a crucial role in the Battle of Memphis.
Ellet was a visionary. He was involved in transportation. He was involved in the whole concept of river navigation. Ironically, his advanced ideas are what killed him in the end. He got himself involved in naval warfare and came up with a scheme of a way to produce a superior warship. And he got the backing of Lincoln's Secretary of War during the Civil War, and he built a couple of these ships. During the Battle of Memphis, he was shot and died as a result. So it was typical of him to go on the line for his ideas. He always felt that his ideas were more important than artifacts. And so he would be more pleased, I think, to know today that his ideas are still alive.
Change is a constant in the bridge's history. The bridge fell into disrepair and was almost demolished in the 1970s, but was saved by a community effort. It's undergone a series of renovations since the turn of the century and was purchased by the state of West Virginia in 1943. Through all the modifications and repairs, the original towers and cables that support the bridge have remained.
Well, it's a cause for celebration that these cables are 150 years old and in the interior essentially in the original condition. There was a great concern that wires would rust. The way around this was to use the French system of soaking each individual wire through a bath of linseed oil and then making up a red lead paste with linseed oil and red lead and packing the cable. And you can see some of the red lead packing which has hardened over the years. America's great triumph economically is certainly based in technology. One of the important issues was providing a transportation system, and this bridge symbolizes that great push to develop internal improvements through technology.
The bridge was named a National Historic Landmark in 1975, designating it a crown jewel of America's cultural resources. Its renovation was celebrated in 1999 with an international conference on historic bridges.
Movement in two different directions.
America's a place for suspension bridges, and here we are to see one of the great ones, and a survivor too. That's most important.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. Come 6,000 miles, whatever it is, to see it.
I think a lot of the affection I see here today is not just because of the beauty of the bridge, which it is, but the power of his ideas have held sway.
The Wheeling Suspension Bridge is the foundation upon which the magnificent suspension bridges gracing the American landscape today were built.
I think the suspension bridges are the ones that capture people's imagination. And I think that's why the Brooklyn Bridge is so important, the Golden Gate Bridge, and of course in Wheeling, this is our Golden Gate Bridge.
Its dimensions now seem modest. One suspension bridge in Japan has a span of 1¼ miles. Yet the Wheeling Suspension Bridge endures.
The bridge is not just steel, iron, and lumber. There are many, many people in Wheeling that have connections over the years to the bridge. Their parents walked it, their grandparents walked it. It's part of Wheeling's heritage.
Look closely, and you can see the work of generations in this structure. The bridge holds in place the journeys of those who have crossed over before, and makes possible journeys yet to be taken.
This program was made possible by the Wheeling National Heritage Area Corporation and the West Virginia Humanities Council. Additional funding was provided by Mr. and Mrs. Dominic E. Cerrone and the Community Foundation for the Ohio Valley Incorporated.